The type of stress that this bank was just subjected to is the type of stress they were supposed to be tested against had they not lobbied hard for themselves to be exempted from the new regulations that were otherwise put in place after the last crash to stop this from happening. Elizabeth Warren was right when she said what rolling back those regulations would do in 2018. Joining us now is Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts and a member of the Senate Banking Committee. Senator, I really appreciate you making time to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you understand these things well. I really don't. I don't have a head for this stuff. I'm not a person who's financially minded at all. Let me just first start by asking you if I've missed out anything important or if I've explained this in a way that comports with your understanding.
Nope, you got it basically right. That the way to understand this crisis is it's really got kind of three players in it. The first is Congress and President Trump, who said, let's weaken the regulation, which you've hit really hard. The second part is the regulators themselves, in particular, the Fed, in particular, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, who took that change in the laws, and boy, did he run with it. In fact, he ran further than a lot of people even thought the law let him in tailoring the oversight of those banks in order to make it as weak as possible. And by the way, just a little side note, I very much opposed his being renominated to the Federal Reserve Bank, and the reason was exactly this, what he had done on using the opportunities he had by the change in the law in 2018 to weaken bank regulations. In my view, he was just headed in the wrong direction, and that's what made him dangerous in the position of chair of the Fed. But then there's part three, and that is those executives, those bank CEOs who lobbied hard to get this change in the law. Those are the ones who, when the window opened, wow, were they ready to go. And they went out and they decided to load up on risk. And why? They loaded up on risk because it made their banks more profitable. And that meant it made them have higher salaries. They got to rule over bigger banks. They got big bonuses. They brought in their friends. And they did all that by taking on more risk. And it worked. SVB increased its profitability of the last 3 years by 40%. They took on all that risk, made themselves more profitable right up to the day that the bank exploded. And that's the whole story. Part one, the Congress, part two, the regulators, and part three, the executives who took advantage of this.
Well, people around the country watching this right now, and I think people around the country trust you on these issues because this is how we all get to know you as a public figure in the first place, was explaining these difficult and scary things, particularly in moments of crisis. People around the country watching you right now who don't have deposits at Silvergate or at Silicon Valley Bank or at Signature, may not have even heard of some of these banks, have their deposits in other community banks or in big banks. They're wondering if this is a problem that is specific to the tech industry, which is the Silicon Valley Bank, and the crypto industry, which seems to have been tied to Signature and to Silvergate, these other banks. People are wondering if this is something that's confined to sort of niche areas of the economy, or if this is something that these same kind of criticisms that you're describing apply to other kinds of banks and potentially even bigger banks as well.
So when you talked about regulation, one little twist on it is that we really have had, since Dodd-Frank, a kind of two-tier regulatory system. One for the community banks that is pretty light touch regulation. It says, in effect, they didn't cause the crash back in 2008, and they're not going to cause a crash later on. They are pretty simple how they're run, pretty straightforward. They serve their communities. And frankly, they don't need a whole lot of oversight. That's great. And it works well. If you have your money in a bank like that, good for you. It'll be fine. The very largest banks still have the tougher regulation that Dodd-Frank put in place, the great big name brand banks. What happened is these banks, they're often called regional banks, although they're really national, is this tier of banks that are big, that the old line had been anybody with more than $50 billion in assets is going to be subject to these stronger regulations. They got it changed to $250 billion. And what you have is this group of very aggressive banks, some more aggressive than others, some run in wilder ways than others. But that's where the problem is in the system. What the President of the United States has now said, and I want to stop here and say, boy, am I glad that Joe Biden is President of the United States right now. He approached this in a way that is very calm, stayed right on top of it, and said, we're going to have to do something different here. We're going to have to tell all those small businesses who've got their money in those banks, all those nonprofits who've got their money in those banks, all those folks who are worried about meeting payroll when Monday rolls around, their money is fully protected. And that's what everybody at home needs to know. If you're a depositor in one of these banks, your money is fully protected. Take a deep breath. Nothing you need to worry about on that end of it. But our job is to think about the system overall. And that means we need Congress to act. Congress needs to roll back the Trump bank regulation relief. We need to make a change in the laws, because then that will affect the regulators, and the regulators will make sure that they are engaging in closer supervision over those banks, and that in turn will rein in any of the CEOs that think banking is a great place to get a multi-million-dollar salary and a bunch of bonuses and your own jet plane. Remember, you and I have talked about this before. What should banking be? Banking should be boring. And anybody who wants to take a lot of risk and make a lot of money should not be in banking. Banking should be boring. And that's how we need to make some changes in the law. We, Congress, need to go back. We need to get rid of the Trump banking bill and go back to better regulation. We do that, we'll make banking boring again.
Sign of a functioning democracy and a well-run polity is when people, not only is banking boring, but when people are right and everybody else is wrong, and it becomes crystal clear on days like this, the people who are right get to have the last word about it, at least get to be the ones who get the pride of place. And Senator Elizabeth Warren, that's why on days like this, we turn to you. Thank you for your clarity, as always. Thank you for joining us tonight, Senator.
Thank you.